Most goals conceded in a single match. El Salvador holds one of the most painful records in World Cup history, conceding 10 goals in a single match against Hungary in 1982. And what makes it worse is that El Salvador had already conceded 3 goals earlier in the tournament before this happened. Hungary was simply on another level that day, with Laszlo Kiss coming off the bench to score a hat-trick as a substitute, which is itself a World Cup record. El Salvador's goalkeeper Luis Guevara Mora had absolutely no chance, and the 10-0 scoreline remains the joint biggest margin of defeat in World Cup history. To this day, it stands as a brutal reminder of just how wide the gap between football nations can be on the world's biggest stage. Most own goals in a tournament. The 2022 Qatar World Cup set the record for most goals scored in a single tournament with 16. That's nearly 1 per day of the tournament. To put that into context, the entire 1994 World Cup, which featured 52 games, only produced 6 own goals total. In Qatar, some of the most unfortunate moments came from players like Yassine Bounou, who despite being one of the best goalkeepers at the tournament, could do nothing when his own defenders turned the ball into the net. The evolution of pressing tactics and high-tempo play in the modern game has made goals far more common, but 16 in one tournament is a record nobody was racing to set. Most red cards in a career. Rigobert Song holds the record for most red cards received by a single player across multiple World Cups, being sent off at both the 1994 and 1998 tournaments. In 1994, he became the youngest player ever to be sent off at a World Cup at just 17 years old, getting dismissed against Brazil. Then 4 years later at France '98, he did it again against Chile, becoming the first player ever to be sent off at 2 separate World Cup tournaments. Despite this, Song went on to have a successful career, earning over 100 caps for Cameroon and even captaining his nation. But those 2 red cards will always follow his World Cup legacy. Fastest red card. José Batista of Uruguay holds the record for the fastest red card in World Cup history, receiving his marching orders just 56 seconds into a match against Scotland at the 1986 World Cup in Mexico. 56 seconds. The game had barely started. Batista's reckless challenge on Gordon Strachan left the referee with no choice, and Uruguay were forced to play the remaining 89-plus minutes with 10 men. Somehow, they held on for a 0-0 draw, which is arguably an even more remarkable record than the sending-off itself. Scotland, despite having a man advantage for nearly the entire game, couldn't find a way through, a result that ultimately helped send Scotland home early. Most tournaments without winning a game. Scotland holds the record for the most World Cup appearances without ever advancing past the group stage, having attended 8 tournaments without once making it to the knockout rounds. And the truly painful part isn't just that they kept going out early. It's how they went out. Scotland were eliminated from the 1974, 1978, and 1982 tournaments entirely on goal difference despite not losing a game in 1974. They went home in 1978 after a famous win over the Netherlands wasn't enough due to earlier results. No nation in World Cup history has been so consistently, heartbreakingly close without ever crossing the line. Sorry, Scotland fans. Worst goal difference in a tournament. Zaya's 1974 World Cup campaign is one of the most infamous in the tournament's history. They became the first sub-Saharan African nation to qualify for the World Cup, which was a genuine achievement, but what followed was brutal. They conceded 14 goals in 3 games while scoring none, finishing with a goal difference of -14. Their worst moment came in a 9-0 defeat to Yugoslavia, which remains one of the most lopsided results in World Cup history. Their most infamous moment, however, came when defender Mwepu Alunga ran out of the wall and kicked the ball away during a Brazilian free kick, apparently unaware of the rules. It was a tough tournament, but Zaya's participation still meant everything to African football. Most losses as a host nation. South Africa became the first and so far only host nation to be eliminated in the group stage of a World Cup in 2010. Hosting the tournament on home soil is supposed to provide a boost, with the crowd behind you and no travel required. South Africa drew with Mexico, lost to Uruguay, and beat France in a tournament where France had completely imploded due to an internal revolt. Despite finishing level on points with Mexico, they went home on goal difference. The entire nation had dreamed of making history as hosts, and technically they did, just not in the way anyone wanted. They remain the only host nation in 92 years of World Cup football to go out before the knockouts. Most penalties missed in a shootout. Italy's 2022 elimination at the hands of North Macedonia didn't even involve a shootout, but when it comes to penalty shootout failures on the bigger stage, England have a strong claim to the most painful record. Between 1990 and 2018, England lost 5 out of 6 major tournament shootouts. At the 1998 World Cup, David Batty and Paul Ince both missed against Argentina, sending England home. In 2006, Frank Lampard, Steven Gerrard, and Jamie Carragher all missed against Portugal. The English Football Association even built a dedicated training facility specifically to practice penalties. It took until Euro 2021 for England to finally win a major tournament shootout, but the scars of those decades run deep. Longest goal drought. Going into the 2002 World Cup, the Republic of Ireland's Robbie Keane ended a drought, but on the international stage the most impressive scoreless run belongs to teams rather than individuals. Saudi Arabia went 720 consecutive minutes at World Cups without scoring between 1994 and 2018, spanning 4 tournaments. That is the equivalent of 8 full matches of football where the ball simply refused to go in. And then in 2022, they pulled off arguably the greatest upset in World Cup history, beating Argentina 2-1 in the group stage. Going from a 720-minute scoreless drought to beating the eventual champions is one of the most dramatic reversals in the tournament's history. Most tournaments without qualifying. India, despite having over 1 billion people and a passionate cricket culture, have only ever qualified for one World Cup, in 1950, and they withdrew before playing a single game due to a dispute over whether they could play barefoot. That means India have exactly 0 World Cup matches played, and 0 goals scored or conceded, across the entire history of the tournament. With the world's second largest population, India's absence from the World Cup remains one of football's greatest untapped stories. Qualifying for the expanded 2026 edition with 48 teams might finally be their moment, but for now the record stands. Fastest goal conceded. Turkey conceded the second fastest goal in World Cup history in 2002 when Hakan Şükür actually scored the fastest goal, but on the receiving end, the record for fastest goal conceded belongs to the same match, with South Korea netting just 11 seconds in against Turkey in the third-place playoff. Hakan Şükür's 11-second strike is the fastest goal ever scored at a World Cup, and for the South Korean defense it was barely enough time to finish walking into position before they were picking the ball out of their net. The match ended 3-2 to Turkey, but the opening 11 seconds will be what everyone remembers. Most expensive failure. Few World Cup campaigns have been more costly relative to expectations than France in 2010. They arrived as genuine contenders with a squad packed with superstars and promptly imploded spectacularly. Players went on strike and refused to train. Nicolas Anelka was sent home for verbally abusing the manager Raymond Domenech at half-time of their second match. The team held a training boycott the following day. They lost to Mexico and South Africa, drew with Uruguay, and went home bottom of their group. An official government inquiry was launched into the collapse. The French Football Federation was thrown into chaos. For a nation that had won the World Cup in 1998 and reached the final in 2006, it stands as one of the most dramatic collapses in tournament history. Most own goals by one player. Manuel Rosas of Mexico holds the unique distinction of scoring the first ever own goal in World Cup history, turning the ball into his own net against Argentina at the inaugural 1930 World Cup. He also scored a legitimate goal in the same match, meaning he both scored for and against his own team in the same game. Mexico lost 6-3. It is a strange kind of immortality, being forever remembered as the man who scored the first own goal in the history of the World Cup. A record nobody was trying to set and one that will likely never be forgotten. Longest winless run. Scotland again. From 1954 to 1990, Scotland went 9 consecutive World Cup matches without a single win, a stretch spanning 36 years. They drew some and lost others but could not find a way to win a single game on football's biggest stage across nearly 4 decades of trying. They finally ended the streak in 1990 against Sweden with a 2-1 win, a moment of genuine relief more than celebration. To have qualified for tournament after tournament and left without a single win across such a vast stretch of time is a kind of beautiful, painful futility that only Scotland could really pull off. Most tournaments entering as favourites and failing. Brazil have reached the final only once since 1970, despite entering nearly every tournament since as one of the favourites. But the record that truly stings is 2014, when Brazil were not only hosts but one of the top favourites, and were beaten 7-1 by Germany in the semi-final on home soil. The game, known simply as the Mineirazo, saw Brazil concede 5 goals in an 18-minute stretch in the first half. Goalkeeper David Luiz was in tears. Fans in the Estadio Mineirão wept openly. It remains the heaviest defeat ever suffered by a host nation and one of the most shocking results in the history of sport, not just football.